and let's talk about the Thief Acrobat. The Thief Acrobat was a character class from AD&D, also one of the characters in the D&D cartoon show, Diana, the Thief Acrobat. And the Acrobat has always fascinated me because it's one of those subclasses for the Rogue that comes up a lot, but I've never really been super happy with the implementation. In part because I think when you tell people things like, you can normally jump 8 feet, now you can jump 12. Like in real life, that's incredibly impressive. But I think it's hard in a game like D&D where we usually think in 5-foot increments to really get, oh, I can jump 1 extra 5-foot square. That seems underwhelming, right? So the challenge I had in looking at the Acrobat was say, well, what can I give you that feels really crazy, like almost feels broken to the point where you'd want to play it, but knowing it's not actually broken because we're going to balance it and our system designers are going to make sure it's all working. So what we're going to start with is I want to take a look at the Rogue character class. So I'm going to go to my handy dandy web browser. And again, don't worry if you can't read the screen. I'm not going to just like, okay, now read the screen while I take a nap. I'll walk you through everything as we go through, sort of have the screen up. So if you can see it, you can look where I'm looking in the player's handbook text, but really walking you through this. So our first step is to take a look at our character class and also the existing subclasses. And you're going to see some actually really stark differences between the Rogue and the Warlock that I'm going to, I took notes, so I'm going to nerd out over this. So I hope you guys are ready for some like real deep talk about the classes, because it is actually really interesting to me when you look at the Rogue versus the Warlock, you actually, and I picked Rogue intentionally to showcase this difference. You're going to see two very different approaches to class design structurally in D&D. With the Warlock, the patron is a choice you make at first level. It is something very important to your identity as a character. The Rogue doesn't pick the subclass until third level. So what we're saying to you when we make that distinction of a first level subclass choice versus a third level subclass choice is that the core class identity for the class that chooses its third is much more distinct, much stronger, and much more impactful on the character than it is for the class when you pick at first level. Think of a cleric. If I'm a cleric of the god of war versus a cleric of the god of time, you might be thinking of two very different characters in your mind when you think of them. I know for me, what I picture is, cleric, god of war, cleric in heavy armor with a big mace or maybe an axe. God of time, I might be thinking of someone in robes who looks more like a scholar. And I'd expect on an adventure that might be doing very different things. The cleric of the god of time might be coming up with a lot of lore, might be very good at solving puzzles. Cleric of god of war, it's no surprise, is probably pretty good at beating down monsters. They might be very different characters, but we'd say in the world of Dungeons & Dragons that they're both clerics, because they're both deriving their power from the gods. What we say about rogues is the opposite. If we have two rogues, an assassin and a thief, they're both probably wearing like leather armor. They both probably have knives, rapiers, a bow, similar weapons. They look the same, but how they achieve their mastery, in this case for rogues, they're very good with skills. Rogues are very good at skill checks. A rogue who chooses to focus on a skill is probably the best character in that skill in the party. The assassin versus the thief, there's going to be just some differences in how they specialize, but they're specializing in a very similar context, a very similar area of the game. And that's really where you see that third level subclass pick come in, that we're saying the class has a very strong identity independent of the subclass, versus a class where that subclass really drives the character's identity. So let's take a look at the rogue, and you can see it when we go down to the rogue archetypes. I'm going to take the thief versus the assassin. There's the arcane trickster, but that's a little bit of an outlier because it uses spells. And I'll get to that last, but what I'd like to do is focus on the assassin and the thief. The assassin at third level gets bonus proficiencies and the assassinate ability. The assassinate ability basically models the idea that the assassin, if the assassin can gain surprise on a foe, can score one very devastating hit that in some cases would just instantly kill potentially the target. You can imagine an assassin of moderate level striking a commoner, essentially the mayor of the town who has no martial training and is not a spellcaster, is just your maybe 1 or 2 hit die human, could be killed in one shot. Thinking that's really, or if it's someone who is trained or is a little more powerful, it's that opening attack that can essentially tilt the fight so far in the assassin's favor that it's going to end in that character's, for that character winning. Then we compare this to the, we have we have all the ones here today, the Mastermind and the Inquisitive. I'm going to go down to the Thief, though. Those are some of the Xanathar's ones. And the Thief at 3rd level gets fast hands. So with Cunning Action, which we'll talk about when we go back to the core class, you can make, you can disarm a trap, you can use an use an object, or use Sleight of Hand, presumably, for instance, to pick pockets. And you also can climb faster. So you're pretty good at escaping. And when you go to jump, you can jump an additional distance. Now, we talked about the Acrobat. The second story work ability that improves your jumping and your climbing immediately kind of goes, wait a sec, we have to watch out because the Acrobat might want to do something similar. We don't want to just copy what the Thief does. In fact, we have to make sure that our ability for the Acrobat is clearly better than what the Thief gets. Because we want the person who says, I want to be the really mobile character to pick Acrobat and not Thief. That's a subtle but very important thing in 5th edition design. We want you to, if you picture a character, to very quickly find the option that matches that character in your mind, rather than have to compare two things that look very similar and try to figure out which one is actually the better choice. Now, kind of going on this idea that the subclass does not carry as much weight, we don't get our next ability until 9th level. And you can see for the Thief, it's Supreme Sneak. You get advantage on stealth checks. Cool. Well, it's only if you only move up to half your speed. So we're giving you something really useful, but there is a restriction on it, which might seem a little like, okay, we're not just giving you this big buff. We're giving you this buff when you move very slowly, which can be really something to kind of work around. It's not just a pure power-up. At 13th level, we give you Use Magic Device for the Thief. This is really based on the legacy of the game, and this is not something you'll probably, if you're doing new design at this stage, have to worry about. But this is really to make sure that thieves, when the class was called Thief and not Rogue, this was an ability characters had. And it's to make sure that the narratives of D&D that were from the 70s and 80s, they still make sense today. If in a D&D novel it talked about a rogue or a thief activating a wand, this is accounting for that. That you can improvise the use of magic items even when it's restricted, like you have to have a class, race, or level requirement. So it's useful, but it's also kind of like we knew when we were designing the core game that it's useful, but it's not really a core feature. No one's saying, oh, I play a rogue just to use this ability, right? Then at 17th level, this is where it looks a little odd, though. Okay, so up to this point, we've been giving you some useful things, but not things that compare to, say, conjuring tentacles that grab people, or calling a Kraken to show up and lay the smack on everyone around you. We do get to 17th level, and we have Thief Reflexes. We give the ability to take 2 turns during the first round of any combat. Okay, let's compare this. The first round of combat, you get 2 turns. Prior to this, we gave you advantage on stealth when you moved half speed. Magnitude, very much a shift there, huh? Like, we've gone from giving you something a little... someone could probably argue with me that Use Magic Device and Supreme Sneak maybe aren't worth writing down in your character sheet for a lot of people, but Thief's Reflexes, yeah, this is something where if you're playing a 17th level game, this is something that's going to come up all the time in fights and be really big. It's going to be very useful. It's going to really tilt things. So we go from a couple useful things you have access to all the time to things that are a little more like useful when you can use them, but maybe you might never actually use them. If you were to forget to use these abilities, your character might not actually be really hindered that much. To, wow, you can kill dudes in your first turn, attack twice as a rogue, which is very good with sneak attack. Now, let's compare that over if we go back to the Assassin. I'm going to scroll up. I hope you don't get motion sickness and the text flying by. But we see a similar pattern. The Assassin's 9th and 13th level abilities, Infiltration Expertise. This is great. It essentially allows you to adopt the false identity, but it's a little corner case. It's something that we don't say, oh, it's really important, you use this every adventure, or your character will feel really weak. Like, no, this is more a storytelling tool. It's kind of thing you might think to yourself, hey, this is something I want to plan for, because you've got to spend 7 days doing this. So this is not something you can necessarily just do with a drop of a hat. If you need to sneak into Candle Keep, you've got to spend a week creating an identity as a scholar or a sage to actually use that to help get your way in. And a lot of adventures, you just don't have that much time. But again, it's a useful option, but it's not a load-bearing option. And then the imposter ability at 13th builds off of that. The idea here is that you can mimic a specific person. Now you have to spend at least 3 hours studying the person. So again, it's not something you can do instantly, but it is more like tactical within a day of adventuring than Infiltration Expertise. And then here's our 17th level ability. If you hit someone when they're surprised, you might just kill them. So again, we go from a couple abilities that if you were to tell me the assassin in my game never uses infiltration, expertise, or imposter, it's like, well, okay, that's, I hope that they don't feel disappointed, but it's not affecting their power, to you kill dudes. So again, what you're seeing here is a pattern that's very different from what the Warlock had. You're seeing a couple abilities that are useful, but niche. You're seeing a general ability that kind of expresses the flavor, but it's not overpowering. And then you're seeing something very powerful. So what's going on with our core class? Because clearly something's different here compared to the Warlock. And when we go to the Rogue general progression, we start to see what's going on. Since this is a class that you don't make your choice till 3rd level, you're getting very powerful abilities that all rogues share. So expertise is, you get that at 1st level, and you get to double your expertise, double your proficiency bonus with a couple of the skills of your choice. That's very useful. Like, you're basically busting the curve for what checks look like, and you're basically saying, the skill I choose, I am quite likely by far the best person in the party at that. You can imagine a rogue with a 16 dexterity who chooses expertise and stealth is getting a +7 bonus to their checks, where the next best person in the party is obviously getting +5. They'd be 2 points behind. But a lot of characters are getting like a +1 or even a -1 if they're dexterity 8. And they might even have disadvantage depending on their armor. So it's even at 1st level, it's giving you a nice gap. And that only gets bigger. At 20th level, that's probably going to be a +17 bonus, if I'm remembering my proficiency bonus of +6 right, and a 20, versus a +11 for a character who has a 20 dex and is still also proficient, versus that fighter who's still maybe at -1 or +0. So this is something that grows over time, and it's class defining. And then sneak attack basically says this is how you fight. Rogues are very good at dealing one attack that deals lots of damage. This here, it's very impactful, but it's also the kind of thing where you get expertise in sneak attack, because sneak attack is really just there to make sure that you keep up with your combat skill versus other characters. So we don't really rate it too high in terms of like, oh, we don't want to give you something else. Thieves' Cant is purely what we call a ribbon. It's something that gives you a nice little toy to play with. If you meet other rogues, you share a secret language, but it's not something we account for in balancing the class. And then at 2nd level, okay, we just gave you, you're the best at skills in the game. And then at 2nd level, we're like, hey, bonus actions. Great. Basically, do things with bonus actions that other people have to use their action for, like dash, disengage, and hide. That's very powerful. Disengage alone means you can attack and move away without getting attacked back. You're basically breaking the game in terms of opportunity attacks, and that you can ignore them if you want. Now, it's important to point out, though, that this is using the bonus action, which means if I in my subclass make anything that uses the bonus action, it has to be really worth it to get you to ignore using cunning action. You'll notice that the thief subclass, instead of saying here's a competing bonus action, said we're going to extend the list of things you can use cunning action on. And I think that's a good approach, because it makes it easier to understand, and also design-wise forces you to look at those options and make sure that they are all things that don't compete with each other. They just broaden the situations in which your cunning action is really paying off. Then scrolling down, I'm going to skip a few things like the roguish archetype. That's just your subclass. Ability score improvements. That's what everyone gets. You get uncanny dodge, which is a reaction. You can, when you get hit with an attack, take half damage from it. Again, that's another thing which is like, oh, do you really want to use reactions for your subclass abilities? Because now I have this really good reaction I might use every single round of a fight. So you can see this class's core abilities, unlike the Warlocks, are really filling in our actions. They're accounting for them in ways that make it difficult for the subclass to compete. Evasion is another defensive ability. Basically, if a dexterity saving throw, you succeed, but it says you still take half damage. This says no, don't worry about it, you take no damage. A little niche, but also pretty good considering rogues aren't the tankiest characters. It gives you another area where you're very good at something, and this gives you insurance and makes you even better at it. Because you're more often than not going to succeed in those saving throws. Reliable talent says your D20 can't result in less than a 10 on your roll, so it ensures a floor of expertise that, combined with your doubling proficiency bonus, means you're always going to be delivering really high, like 20 plus results at high level. Blind Sense. All right. Hey, hello out there. Welcome to the Happy Fun Hour with Mike Mearls. So I am Mike Mearls. I am the creative director on Dungeons & Dragons, And that basically means I oversee the creation of storylines, new mechanics, both for the stuff that Wizards of the Coast publishes and that we work on with our partners. Like, for instance, we have the Neverwinter MMO. We provide them with information on our upcoming storylines and work with them to help shape that storyline so it's filled with everything they need. So if you were with us last week or the week before, you know what we're in the middle of doing right now is going through different classes from D&D, the Player's Handbook, and designing new subclasses for each of them. So last week, if you can see my text, I'll go ahead and embiggen this for you. We worked on the Acrobat for the Rogue. And this one was pretty interesting. Designing subclasses for the Rogue and other classes that make their subclass choice at 3rd level is always a little tricky. Because just by the nature of the character class design, the subclasses usually don't have as much space to work with design-wise. So what you're seeing right now on your screen, and don't worry if you can't read it, I'll walk you through it with each piece. But the concept here was that the Acrobat is a character who is very mobile, maybe the most mobile character in the game. And we hit on this idea that, well, what if the Acrobat could use some sort of flight mechanic? Now, what you're looking at right now, if you can read ahead and you're looking at the text and reading, this represents sort of a first draft attempt to express what this class does. As we walk through this, keep in mind that what we would do next with this text is it would then go over to someone like Kate Welch or Jeremy Crawford. They would review the text and make sure that the implementation is correct, that what this class is trying to do, what the subclass is trying to do, is actually reflected in what these rules say. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. For tabletop game development, your programming language is English or whatever other spoken and written language that you're working in. So taking a look at aerial artistry, this is our 3rd level ability. It's the ability you get when you first choose this subclass for your rogue. And what we talked about last time was looking at something where the character could essentially fly. And so I put some thought into it, and what I kind of landed on was this idea that it would be nice if we could express this as, like, rather than one movement that's just you flying around, to really touch on this flavor that the Acrobat's really bouncing off of things. That this idea is that you take 2 short flight moves, each of which is equal to half your speed. Now, this is an area where normally, if we're working on this for a product, I'd be working much more closely with the other designers to get the wording right and also to get their input. So you can see here the language I've used. The opening text is flavor of text. Well, paragraph is flavor text, missing a period. And then the second paragraph starts to get into the actual mechanic. Now, in design, especially at this stage, this first paragraph is actually very important early on. Looking at it, I'll read it for you. Starting at 3rd level, you gain the ability to move with incredible speed, precision, and power. Few obstacles can prevent you from reaching your destination. That's important, even if that paragraph doesn't make it to the final design. What that's doing is laying out for the next designer to look at this. If I'm not in the room, if I'm not there to answer questions, they can read that and understand what we're trying to do here. Now, in a product, what this also does is for a player, they can read that and understand, here's why I'd want to play this character. It's laying out the movie in your mind that shows you here's what's happening at the table. Not every ability gets this, and typically as you go to higher levels, you might not see something that's as precise because you already kind of know what you're signed up for. But it's usually useful in that first class feature that a subclass gives you that you can just quickly lay out, here's what this should be doing. So now taking a look at the mechanics, when you move, you can instead take 2 short movements by flying. I'm going to tell you straight up, this is the section I just highlighted. It's probably not worded correctly to interact with the rest of the system because we're really creating something new here. But we'll just go ahead. The idea is that you don't just fly once, you kind of fly twice. And then you'll see kind of where we're going with this is that each movement is at half your speed and you must end each one on a solid object or ground. If you do not, you fall and your movement ends. The movement ends thing is important because you might do your first one, and then we want to sort of penalize you for not playing by the rules of this class. Now, the idea here is to capture the sense, and this is something I was thinking about a lot. The Acrobat just flying around, when I was thinking about it, one of the things that you try to consider in building a subclass is to think, what is going through the player's mind as they're playing the game? And the more you can make the player's thoughts mirror the character's thoughts, the stronger your design is. Because that really allows that really immersive role-playing where you get to really feel like your character. And so what this is trying to capture is, I could just say you can just fly your speed. But A, I worried a bit that the flavor would just be off of the table. You know, you're going to fly 30 feet straight up to a, you know, and it's fine, but it's not quite the flavor I was looking for. But the other thing it does is it makes you start thinking like a parkour expert. You're going to look around and think, okay, I have to jump from here, bounce off that, then get up to here. So if there's a rope just dangling in space above you, it's not just a matter of I just fly up and grab it. It's a matter of thinking, okay, what I'm going to do is somersault off the Ettin's head, because the Ettin's about 12 feet tall, let's say, and then I can do the remaining 10 feet, I can then jump up and reach the rope. And then there's another thing we talked about last week. When subclass abilities can interact well with class features, that's really fun. So then you think to yourself, okay, I need to move off of that creature. And this should probably say creature and object rather than just object and ground. So we'll make that change in a moment. It makes you think, okay, I need to use my cunning action to cancel out opportunity attacks. Or I need to cover more distance, so I'm going to use my my class feature to dash. So that's another way in which those two abilities are working together really well. So I'm going to say you must each one on a creature, solid object, or ground. So there we go. So that's the idea of getting you to start thinking like an acrobat, to make you really look at the environment and think, how can I bounce off of things? How can I use things that might otherwise be barriers to other characters to my advantage? So I can reach a spot where either I'm safe, I can mess with the enemy's plan, I can foil a trap, and so on. Even in the sort of very mundane, like, you know, outside of combat, let's say you're trying to scale a castle wall. This gets you to think of like, okay, the acrobat moves up to the wall, dashes up the side of the wall, vaults off the gargoyle that's sort of mounted halfway up the wall and is up at the top. It still helps bring out a narrative and a visual identity in your mind, that story, that looks different from, say, the warlock casting a spell, you know, casting a quick teleport, or a wizard using fly or levitate. It feels distinct, and as drawbacks go, it's really not that big of a one. Because you have cunning action to really cover up, either double your speed, which now essentially you're moving your speed, then touching something solid, then moving your speed again, or to avoid opportunity attacks. So that's where we ended up with that. I also wanted to feel really unique. I didn't want it just to be just fly, because I just felt like, you know, if you're playing an Aarakocra, you can just, you know, why would you play this when you can just play a flying character? So then going on, we talked about last week, our 9th and 13th level abilities really don't have a big impact on the character. And so these were fairly small elements that just kind of overall augment your ability. Though you'll see the 13th level one's a bit bigger, but I'll get to that in a second. At 9th level, you no longer take damage from falling. So that's just a cover if you try to do something tricky, or you're trying to move and you realize something changes, like an opponent uses a reaction to move out of the way. This kind of covers you. It still ends your movement per aerial artistry, but you're not taking damage. Then at 13th level, we give you a constant freedom of movement effect. This is really good. It shuts down a lot of things that could slow you down, but that kind of fits into that flavor of the acrobat, that you're very agile, very mobile, and it's very hard to pin you down. Now, this wording, what it says is, there's the intro text, you gain the benefits of freedom of movement. I'm not exactly sure how we phrase what's essentially a mundane character getting a constant spell. There might be a better way to phrase that. But again, this is the kind of thing where that would get pushed over then for discussion about how should we phrase this. Now, what I could do, what I should do, what I would do, I'd look through some of our subclasses to see is there a good example to look for the template, or look in our guide. I didn't have time to do that when I was finishing this up, but that's something that I would do next. And a lot of that, we're giving you freedom movement at 13th, because at 17th level, you know, I still wasn't quite sure how we wanted to do this. 17th level abilities, they're really good abilities in combat. And as you see, I have one sentence here. At 17th level, you gain the ability to leave hordes of enemies scattered in your wake. That was me just kind of brainstorming, trying to think, what's a good idea for 17th level? I'm still not crazy about it. Like, I get that maybe just for balance reasons, we need to have something that's offensive here. But for now, you know, one of the nice things about this being a high-level ability is I can run a playtest. I can think about it some more. We have enough stuff here to get a playtest up to 13th level. We actually don't even need to worry about designing this now. So I'm actually going to leave that blank, because what I want to see is to get a real sense of in play what players are doing and what they're asking for. Then I can go back and make sure that that high-level ability is really interesting and useful. My initial thought was to do something where every creature space you move through, you get to attack them, but that just didn't sit well. You know, it felt kind of like it was coming out of nowhere. compared to the other abilities. So I'm actually going to leave this one blank for now. Because I said, well, this is a great example of playtesting isn't always about validating mechanics. Sometimes it's about inspiring mechanics. And so this is something where what I would do next is send this out for playtest and then ask and see what the feedback comes back as far as what players are missing and what they might want. This is also partly why sometimes you may have seen us do playtests for new classes that go only from levels 1 to 10, because that feedback really helps build out 11 through 20. We can go ahead and design the entire span of levels, but if we can, we'd like to try to start like levels 1 to 5, 1 to 10, because then that gives us more likely that our extra design work will be useful and on point. So that's where we are with the Acrobat. We'll probably come back to this one next week. Maybe I think I'll have time on Friday, or maybe even tonight. Actually, I think I'm playing tonight. So we're going to see. Maybe I'll have a chance to try. I'll talk to the DM, see if I can play one of these characters, and we'll see how it goes. So that's where we are with the Acrobat. And like I said, in your own design, don't be afraid of blank spaces. Sometimes those are just things where you could bang your head against the wall for a while and really not make any progress. It can get frustrating. There's nothing wrong with going off. And what I often find is I work on something completely different. And that's what helps me get some clarity. It helps bring some inspiration. I'll watch a movie, especially if you just watch a movie that has a character that you think fits into this. So like a Jackie Chan movie would be perfect to watch, especially say like maybe Rumble in the Bronx, one of my favorites of his, that has a lot of instances where he's moving around, really using his agility. His character in the movie is not, like he often plays, it's not like this big tough guy who just goes around beating up people. He's kind of this sort of, madcap kind of funny guy. I think it's supposed to be in the Bronx, but it's clearly Canada when you watch the movie. But it's great, and it's also, it's a really funny movie. So it also kind of fits in maybe what the Acrobat's tone would be. Less I'm here to crush you, and more like, oh, I'm kind of doing these wacky things, bouncing off walls and turning my enemies against each other, and just being really, really agile. All right, so that's where we are with the Acrobat.